Rise up!
This is the Rise Up See Red podcast, all about the Arizona Cardinals and the NFL, featuring insider and outsider perspectives. Enjoy the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Now here are your hosts, Jess Root and Seth Cox.
Hello, Arizona Cardinals fans, and welcome to the latest edition of the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. I'm your host, Jess Root, from CardsWire.com, the Arizona Cardinals site from the USA Today NFL Wire. And Seth Cox is with me, my co-host, from RevengeOfTheBirds.com, the SB Nation Arizona Cardinals site. The two of us have been covering the Cardinals for years and years. Grew up here, been Cardinals fans. And so thank you for joining us for another episode. This is episode 297. As we creep more into the offseason, we've got a lot on our plates today, Seth. We are on the big bye week. We have our Super Bowl teams, and, you know, there's some Cardinals connections there, but we'll talk a little bit about the Super Bowl. We've got some things to talk about. We've got some coaching changes. We've got the salary cap to look at. We've got some quarterback musical chairs that appear to be happening around the league. And with a reduced salary cap, there are some teams in really, really bad shape. So let's already kick things off, Seth. This is what we've got so far. We're going to start off with the coaching changes on the Arizona Cardinals. They made some moves official. Tom Clements, pass game coordinator and quarterbacks coach, retires. Cam Turner is promoted to quarterbacks coach. Sean Kugler gains a new title, is now the offensive line coach / run game coordinator. And Sean Jefferson, who was part of Adam Gase's staff with the New York Jets when they were let go, he is hired to be the team's new wide receivers coach, as David Rye is no longer on staff for whatever reason, but he is actually heading to Vanderbilt to be the offensive coordinator. The Cardinals also lose their assistant special teams coach, Darius Swinton, who is now the special teams coordinator for the Los Angeles Chargers, in Brandon Staley's new staff. So, First off, simply, what were your reactions to some of these we knew were coming, but the one that was a surprise was Kugler. What did you think of, what was your reaction when you saw that Kugler got that promotion?
Honestly, I didn't even know he wasn't the run game coordinator.
That was serious, because I knew he was all over the run game. I didn't realize he didn't have that title.
Yeah, and so, I mean, it's a good thing in terms of, a little inside baseball on these things. This is a way to keep coordinators for teams, or not coordinators, but coaches and stuff for teams. Coordinators typically get paid, the second most after the head coach, obviously. And so if you have a guy that you really like, or a valuable asset on the team, the best way to make sure that you keep him around, because typically these guys only have 2-year contracts, and then they renew every 2 years. And so the best way to keep these guys around is you give them a fancy title,
which brings money.
I think Sean Jefferson was even the assistant head coach
for the
with
Jets.
the Jets,
that is
right?
True.
And so, that's the thing is, if you give them these fancy titles, then all of a sudden they're paid more. So, because remember, the only move that's not considered lateral in the NFL is going from whatever your job is to a head coach. Position coaches to coordinators. The NFL or teams don't have to allow you to go interview for those. Now, most teams will allow position coaches to go interview for coordinators positions just because it's, the best way to do business, because again, those guys are only under 2-year contracts, so
Right.
you don't want to poison the well, so to speak, to have a guy for an
And
extra season.
force a guy to stick around who doesn't want to be there. And the only time you ever see that happen is if you've got a position coach that the team intends on promoting to a coordinator spot. Kind of like what the 49ers did with their run game coordinator, Mike McDaniels. The teams wanted to interview him. They said no, and then they made him offensive coordinator.
Right. And so that's the thing, is a guy like Kugler, obviously year two's ended. They probably had art. I mean, they don't really announce assistant coaches' contracts,
Not at all.
but they probably had already worked out a re-signing him and bringing him back. And that's the way you say, hey, don't worry about going to one of these 8 teams with a new head coach. We'll take care of you, and we'll make you the run game coordinator, give you a little extra money. So, and then there's also some strategy for the teams in this, in that you give them one extra title at a time, and then you basically can have a guy for 6 seasons, really, before you run out of extra money and title to throw his way. And let's be honest, most regimes don't last 6 seasons. So, but you can get a guy like Kugler and say, hey, you're the, run game coordinator. And then, God willing, everything works out. In 2 years, you say, hey, you're the assistant head coach now. And, now all of a sudden he gets one more pay bump. And so that's how they kind of game the system. And it makes sense. Like, Kugler's done a nice job. The offensive line play is, markedly better. Obviously, we saw some issues kind of towards the end of the season, but that's going to happen, with a lot of teams, unless you're a team that just has either a dominant offensive line or a quarterback that makes up for bad offensive line play, which Kyler Murray does when he's 100% healthy. It's gonna, that kind of injury and attrition type thing is gonna wear down over the season.
Well, and you look at the work that, if you look kind of individually, so you look at the collective line play, statistically it's been great, because the run game, the running game, the run blocking has been very good the last 2 years. And if you look at the progress from year 1 to year 2 in terms of pass blocking and sacks allowed, how they grade out is continue to improve. And then you look at the individual development. You had DJ Humphries, who has now, with his play over the last 2 years, is a deserving Pro Bowl type player. Didn't make the Pro Bowl, but arguably deserving of a Pro Bowl berth. You bring in a veteran like Kelvin Beachum, who's played basically left tackle his whole career, playing right tackle the first time, had a solid year. They bring in a guy off of waivers in Justin Murray 2 seasons ago. He starts 12 games and is adequate at right tackle, and they see him as a starting guard moving forward. You look at Justin Pugh's consistency since Kugler came. It's very promising. Now, the one thing that we haven't had, and with the retirement of Tom Clements and kind of the development of things that have happened, what pretty much the fan base is hoping for, has been kind of calling for, and we talked about this in the last show, is hiring or promoting someone to be an offensive coordinator. And I'll give you 2 takes on this, those of you who are listening. And I wrote about it because with the addition of Kugler, so Tom Clements was listed as a coordinator, as a pass game coordinator. Technically, it's a coordinator job. And so if you looked at the team site and the coaching roster, you have Cliff Kingsbury at the top as the head coach, and then you had Jeff Rodgers, Vance Joseph, and Tom Clements, all 3 which are your coordinators. Clements wasn't the offensive coordinator, but he did a lot of offensive coordinator type things. Cliff Kingsbury's been very clear that he's going to call plays. That's his thing. And with his retirement, it's led to speculation that, perhaps that Cliff would then bring in someone, not wouldn't be to call plays, but maybe someone to support him some more and do that. We talked about a few names on our last show. We've even seen the other two teams in the NFC West who, Sean McVay didn't have an offensive coordinator for his first couple of years. Kyle Shanahan had not had an offensive coordinator, and then McVay even brought once Kevin O'Connell became available to him, he brought him over, made him an OC. Kyle Shanahan, now that he's lost Robert Saleh as head coach, and then he lost his pass game coordinator. His run game coordinator, Mike McDaniels, had interest around the league, and they blocked him from interviewing, then made him offensive coordinator. So as of right now the Seahawks are going to hire an offensive coordinator. They just fired with Ryan Schottenheimer, but they're going to replace him. So the Cardinals right now are the only team without an offensive coordinator. Kugler, as with the title bump of run game coordinator, is now listed on the team's coaching roster on the same tier as Joseph and Rodgers, which would lead one to believe that's the move that they're going to make, that they will not, again for the third year in a row, have a guy with the title of offensive coordinator. Though on another one, there's a media login where it has the coaching roster as well. Kugler is still listed among the position coaches, even with that title. Clements, he was listed first among the other coordinators. So there's a little bit of hope if we do that, but I don't think they're going to add anyone with that title. And honestly, based on what we know about Cliff, it's not like having someone with that title is magically going to make things better.
Yeah, and so that's what you kind of look at through the whole thing, and then figure out how this works out and what you want to do and how you want to kind of construct your roster or your coaching roster moving forward. And
then, of the move, kind of the thing that I'm interested in seeing now, like we said, I totally thought he was the run game coordinator. Now he's got the title, so he got some pay bump to it. Because Tom Clements was listed as a pass game coordinator, I wonder how much of his hands were in on the passing game, or how much his influence affected the way the passing game worked. Because technically, with no pass game coordinator now, we would guess that's going to be kind of more of a Cliff Kingsbury thing. I'm interested in seeing moving forward if we see the passing game and passing philosophy change at all, or if Clements simply, if the passing game was still all Cliff's thing and Clements was a sounding board for some concepts. I'm interested to see if there's going to be any change in some of the concepts.
Right, exactly. How do they kind of work through this? And again, like it's going to be interesting to see where they are, in this continued evolution and trying to get, this team to a consistent winning point, and how that's going to look on offense. Because remember, they had a massive first-year jump in terms of offensive efficiency, offensive statistics, and that didn't change in the second year. So it seemed as though they took a step back when they were just kind of the same. And that's going to be the thing is, we're seeing that it's top 5 offenses are how you win in today's NFL. And so is Cliff and Kugler and those guys, are they going to be able to get a top 5 offense onto the field?
Yeah. The other move, which brought in Sean Jefferson, it's an interesting move because it seemed out of the blue. Obviously, he has the stigma of having worked with Adam Gase. Now, Sean Jefferson has been coaching receivers for a long time. He's had some very good years. So, background that he's coached with the Lions, and his last 3 years with the Lions were coaching Calvin Johnson's best years. He, with the Dolphins, when he was with Adam Gase there, Vance Joseph and Charlie Bullen, so defensive staff, the defense coordinator and outside linebackers coach for the Cardinals, were on that defensive staff. Jarvis Landry was a Pro Bowl receiver each of those 3 years that he was in Miami. So it's kind of interesting to see the facts. So what was surprising was, one, there is no connection that I can find at all with Jefferson and any of the offensive coaches that the Cardinals have. Obviously, there is a connection with Vance Joseph and with Charlie Bullens on the defensive side, but it's not. There's nothing there on the offensive side. But this move, I'm kind of excited about, because as much as I respected David Rye and what he had done with the Packers and the connection he had to to Cliff Kingsbury, is the fact that Jefferson brings some extra juice to that room because of the fact that he was a 13-year NFL vet who wasn't, like, he was never a number one receiver, but he caught 60 passes, as many as 60 passes in a year. He had over 800 yards a couple of times. He led the NFL in yards per reception, over 22 one season. He had as many as 6 touchdowns, like 13 years in the NFL. He's played in a couple of Super Bowls. He brings a lot of juice to that room to help influence that receiver. Now, that's what I'm most excited about, that even someone like DeAndre Hopkins, I'm not saying that he didn't respect Rye. I have no reason to believe that at all. But when you get a guy who's coached as long as he has and had that long an NFL career, a guy like even DeAndre Hopkins there's going to be a measure more of respect and listening, I think.
Yeah, and I think it goes to show that they're trying to surround Cliff with guys that have that energy and respect that he has for the players. And it's one of those situations where Cliff is very much a player's coach, and so Jefferson's a little bit more fiery. He's been described as psychotic on the sideline before. And that's not a bad thing. You need guys like Brenson Buckner, Sean Jefferson, guys that have played in the league and been successful that can command a room. And again, it's not to say anything negative about David Rye. It sounds like it might have been a mutual parting of ways for him to go be the offensive coordinator at Vanderbilt. And in that case, good luck. And let's go find somebody that maybe fits what we or this team and organization needs just a little more.
Yeah, it was interesting going back to the Rye thing, because the initial report was that he was released from his contract. Now, it had been 2 years, so kind of customary, his deal would have been up and it wouldn't have been a contract release. But it didn't say the report that came out was not that he was fired. And then the confirmation from ESPN's Josh Weinfeld was simply confirming that Rye is no longer the receivers coach. And so some might think, well, he was fired because of underperformance, because the receivers, because they needed that. Or now that we see that he got the offensive coordinator position, is that maybe it was simply letting him go to pursue that type of thing. Or maybe his contract was up and they just didn't renew it. That's the part I don't know, and we're probably not going to get details about. But obviously the receiver room needs something different, because obviously you got DeAndre Hopkins. He's going to perform at a high level. We know that. Larry Fitzgerald, we don't know if he's going to come back. But the guys beyond that, the Christian Kirks, Andy Isabella, Keyshawn Johnson, whoever they bring in, they have to do more next year. And they need something different. So I'm hoping that juice that Jefferson brings will be able to take those guys to another level. And especially and I think for anything else, I think Jefferson will be able to ideally get more out of the younger guys like Kirk, Isabella, and Johnson.
Yeah, and that's just got to be what the hope is.
Coming next on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about the salary cap. The Cardinals are close up to it. They need to make moves, so they need to create space. How can they do that? That's coming up next on Rise Up See Red. We're back on the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about the salary cap. So entering. So as things look right now, it would appear that the cap's going to drop. We don't know exactly where it's going to be. We know that it can't go below 175 million, which is a drop of what is it, like 18 million over this last year or something like that.
Yeah.
And some are expecting it to be closer to 180, so it's going to depend on a few things here and there, but as it is, over the cap has a base salary cap set at 176 million. And as things stand, the Cardinals have $8.7 million of cap space with they've got only 55 contracts on that. Now they only count the top 51 right now. And what's crazy about that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. That puts them 15th in cap space. And we're going to talk a little bit more, but there are some teams in some dire situations. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 teams who are over the cap for next year. That's including the New Orleans Saints, who are 112 million over the cap. Now we're going to talk about that. But the Cardinals have holes and they have free agents that they want to bring back. And $8.6 million is not going to cut it, especially when you've only got one tight end and like one cornerback that you believe is going to be on the roster later on. So let's talk about moves that they can do. We've talked a little bit about this before, but if you're going to make some cap saving moves like right off the bat, what are the first 2 or 3 that you're doing?
I think the first one you do is you go with cutting of Robert Alford. That's going to save you some money.
$7.5 million.
And, obviously you have to have a veteran corner on this roster. After you cut Alford, as you said, literally the only player on the roster at corner is Byron Murphy.
Oh, and there's this dude named Picasso Nelson, a futures deal.
Yeah, so Byron Murphy. And so you look at it from that perspective and you say, okay, we've got to get corners. But $7.5 million, you could get theoretically, one good veteran corner, because as you said, the Cardinals at their paltry 9-ish million are 15th in the NFL. So it's not like there's going to be a lot of high level teams swinging money around. From there, it starts to get really hard, really fast. Justin Pugh is an interesting conversation, but it's not like a Robert Alford where you're saying, oh, just cut him because we can upgrade. Because that's the thing is, can you upgrade from Pugh? I don't think you have an immediate upgrade on the roster. And so cutting Pugh, I think, is what, $6.5 million?
7.25. 7.25 you save.
So, I mean, is $14.75 million? That's enough for one good guard. So you cut Pugh and Alford, you can replace Pugh. So say you go aside Joe Thuney. That's replacing Pugh. And and now all that money you saved is gone. Now, obviously, you can backload the deal, and
you can play with them. You can play with the cap to make it a low cap hit in this year.
But that's the question: is Pugh, is who you bring in enough of an upgrade over Pugh, or are you going to be able to get somebody young and cheap enough to be better than Pugh that it's worth the $7.25 million? And then in turn, what do you do with that $7.25 million? Is that money just going to Hassan Reddick? franchise tag? Is that money going to Patrick Peterson? So that's my thing, is I'm not sure you can cut. If people want to cut Pugh, I completely understand. His level of play, while not as bad as people have said, is still not as good as the salary he is earning. I would agree with that premise. However, that's always my question, is like, are you cutting a guy to create cap space, and how are you replacing the guy? What are you doing with the money? And I just don't know, unless you're going to go get a guy. I don't even know the best corner on the market, if we're being completely honest. But if you're not going to go get a high level corner, then what's the point of cutting Pugh? Um, you know, you can find, like Jess said, you can find different ways to bring on a guy like, let's say, who's the center for the Packers, Corey Lindsey?
Yeah, Lindsley.
Lindsley. You can bring on a Lindsley to play center, cut Mason Cole. It's only, $1 million or so, and then you have Pugh and Lindsley for a season, and then you can cut Pugh. You can do different things, but I just don't know if creating another hole on the roster for 7.25 is going to be enough. And then honestly, from there, it gets like extremely difficult, because the conversation becomes, what do you do with Chandler Jones?
Yeah. So if you're looking at cap, okay, if you're just looking at it from a financial point of view, these are moves that you do. Pugh is the questionable one, but here's, because of age and personnel, the three moves that you do is cut Chandler Jones, cut Jordan Hicks, cut Robert Alford. Then, cutting Jones means $15.5 million. Jordan Hicks means $3 million saved. That's not a ton. And then Alford, you get the $7.5 million. The problem is how that looks, because Chandler Jones and Jordan Hicks are two defensive captains, and they're not just being let go. That's different than, say, last year. I'm sure it was rough for offensive player, for teammates, when they saw that A.Q. Shipley was not brought back, as he was a captain on that team and on that offensive line, a leader. He was a free agent, and they had a player in Mason Cole that they were ready to roll with. And so that's one thing. But when you take a guy under contract, and a guy like Hicks, who's got 2 years left, he's a defensive captain, has been one of the most important players on the defense, even if you, as a fan, you're not in love with his production. And Chandler Jones, who has been one of the very best pass rushers in the NFL since the Cardinals got him, and then you just cut him for money reasons, that leaves a bad feeling in the locker room. Now, you do want this. This is why you cut Jones. He's 31 years old. He only had 1 sack in 4 games, and you believe that you can get, if you think that Hassan Reddick can give you the type of production he got this year and be 26 years old to doing it, that's why you do it. The problem is the risk involved. Here's what I actually do with Chandler Jones. I do some funny cap stuff. And it's, as much as I'd like to extend, I actually don't like to do that, because he's 31 years old. Steve Keim has kind of showed that that's not his MO. That's why he let Calais Campbell walk. I do a semi-restructure by extending his contract into 2022, but that year is a voidable year, is a voiding year. They've done that with I've actually with Devon Kennard, with Devondre Campbell, and with Jordan Phillips. They all created dummy years on the back end of the contracts, and so I would take, he's due to make $15.5 million this year, and you're not going to save $15.5 million, but what you can do is convert 12 of it into an upfront bonus, and then put a 2022 dummy year on his contract, which then spreads that, basically creates $6 million by adding no money and no years, but it does push $6 million of dead money into 2022. The reason why Jones probably isn't going to want a true extension is because if you look at what pass rushers have gotten over the last few years, and you look at the amount that he was paid, that he probably can make more money than what he's going to get on an extension. So I would do that. You don't have to do anything other than, so you do play some funny games with the cap, and at the end of this year, you're not cutting him. The contract just voids. It's actually what they did with Mike Iupati a couple of years ago when they kept him around. They turned the final year of his contract into a voiding year, and you just extend the contract out, and it becomes a voidable year. Robert Alford, a cut, but like you suggested last week, if he's willing, because he's taken all sorts of money from the Cardinals and hasn't played it down, is see if not necessarily a cut, if you simply reduce his salary to the league minimum and allow him to battle for a roster spot and go from there.
And obviously you give him heavy incentives.
Yes. And the good thing is the fact that, hey, you obviously can't go into the season counting on Alford, but
right.
You give him a chance because right. he is a starting caliber corner.
Yeah, if he's ever on the field. But I mean, let's be honest too. We're saying this based on his play from 3 years ago.
That's true.
And I'm not trying to sound like a jerk when I say that. That's just the reality. I mean, this guy literally hasn't played an NFL game in 3 years.
Although he did, before his injuries in camp, he looked fantastic. That's the one thing. He looked fantastic.
Exactly. I mean, there were conversations I had with people I trust, not media guys, but people I trust that worked at the time in the organization that told me Alford's our best defensive player. And so when you look at it from that perspective, I think you give him, the veteran minimum. You say, hey, you play X amount of snaps, say, 50% of the snaps, this bonus kicks in. You play, 75% of the snaps, this bonus kicks in. If you appear in all 16 games, we'll bump you up to $4 or $5 million in what you're making, because we've already paid you handsomely not to do anything.
Exactly. So that's another move I make. Jordan Hicks, the Jordan Hicks move is something I've speculated as a possibility. I don't think it'll happen, but I cut Hicks. And since we've got Isaiah Simmons moving forward, I re-sign Devondre Campbell to play the strong side, to play the Mike inside position, assuming that's something he can do. That way you can put Simmons in a position to play more, and you basically either get a same level production with higher level athleticism in Campbell replacing Hicks. And then the question is with Devon Kennard. This is a hard one, but if I'm doing the same thing, if I'm cutting money from Chandler Jones so I can bring back Hassan Reddick, the question is, do I want Kennard for 2 more years? Or do I bring Marcus Golden? If my goal is to have Reddick and Golden, you got to let Kennard go. But if not, then you cut Kennard, and then you re-sign Reddick, and you try to go for Marcus Golden. Otherwise, you can. I mean, it's going to be actually, if you re-sign Reddick, you kind of have to get Kennard go, because you can't really afford to keep him at an $8 million cap hit next year. After that, it's really tricky. It's really tricky because you can, with the offensive line, if you want to go value style offensive line, you trade Pugh. Obviously, I don't think you want to. I think you try to trade him rather than cut him. And then if you want to go money saving, you put Lamont Gilliard at center, Mason Cole at left guard, and you make do with that, and then you add young depth behind them, but then you are risking a downgrade in play. That is the one thing that happens there. You're risking a downgrade in play when you then replace all three interior linemen. So you're replacing Pugh at guard, Cole at center, and Sweezy at the other guard, which Justin Murray has already sort of replaced him. And then potentially right tackle as well. That's the hard thing there. Max Williams is an interesting case because he's the only tight end left, and he's their only good tight end in terms of complete player, but he's never healthy. Like, except for 2019, he's always hurt. That's the tricky part there. He's one you have to consider, especially since they signed him to an extension before last year.
Yeah, and one of the situations that you run into, and one of the things that I think has been under criticized of Steve Keim, especially by a lot of media, is that this roster is not just devoid of talent, they're just devoid of players.
Right. And they don't have many draft picks this year. That's the thing. So they are low on numbers and they're low on draft picks, which is cheap capital.
And I was looking back through articles that, we've obviously done over the last, you the last decade, me the last 5 years. I don't ever remember this many guys signed to futures contracts. I don't, and so I don't know if that's COVID related, or you're just, again, trying to throw a bunch of stuff at the wall, or if it's just because they need to have 90 guys. They're usually, you have about 96 to 98 coming out of May. And they were really nowhere close to that, as of the beginning of January. So they had to start just kind of bringing, obviously they're interested in these guys, but it's
a
just
large majority of our quote unquote
off-season
camp bodies. I hate to call it that, but there isn't an expectation. There is a hope for development, but there's not an expectation of it. That's why they were unsigned at the end of the year.
Exactly. And so, we'll kind of see how that works out. It's just odd to be a team that has, I think it was 30 before the futures contract. I think they only had 32 guys under contract, and to just have $9 million in salary cap. Right. Now, obviously losing $18 million, if that's what the salary cap is, that makes a difference. But even $27 million is not a lot.
No, it's not. It's not that much. And it's interesting because of the fact that kind of the goal was to stack talent around Kyler Murray, and it looks like last year they tried to do it, and then things just sort of just didn't work out. It's they loaded the roster, and ideally this could have been a playoff team, and it would have been going in the right direction. But then they didn't. They fell apart at the end, and now they're like, "Wait, we don't even have players." And so we're going to be looking at a lot of guys. They're going to have to count on guys, so veterans who went unsigned, so like the Kelvin Beachums of the world, and rookies and undrafted rookies.
Yeah, and that's the thing is, I think, and it's something that you and I have discussed and we've said over and over again, was the dangerous thing, and it continues. And it's going to be interesting because going into a young quarterback's third season, when you're deciding, hey, are we going to give him $400 million or whatever the cost to re-sign Kyler Murray is going to be, you would ideally be loading the team up. I mean, this is the time where you have the 16th pick and you go, you know what? We're a Marshawn Lattimore away. Let's go get Marshawn Lattimore. And now, don't get me wrong, you can still make that trade. There's nothing wrong if you go trade the 16th pick for Marshawn Lattimore, sign him to an extension, you know, blah, 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 blah. The problem is if you do that, now you have Marshawn Lattimore and Byron Murphy. You don't have Marshawn Lattimore and Patrick Peterson and, you know, Robert Alford and Byron Murphy. And so that's where it's interesting, is because this is when you should have been loading up. Like, almost like the DeAndre Hopkins trade was like a year early, because you don't load up in a player's second year, but in that third year, you're like, okay, this is where we're going to take our shot. And they just don't have, again, the sheer numbers to even go with that. There's no way. So instead, you're going to be relying, like you said, heavily on, hey, we got to nail. I mean, they have 6 draft picks. They got to nail 4 of them.
Yeah, that's
a lot.
That's not confidence building, considering the history of their draft picks.
And even if they were great, nailing 4 out of 6 in a draft is really hard. And then they need to find 3, you know, game in, game out contributors in undrafted free agency, and then they have to be able to get, you know, 2 or 3 Kelvin Beachum type veterans that are able to stay healthy. I mean, because that was one of the things with Dre Kirkpatrick this year, is he was on and off the field a lot in just terms of like dinged up and little things like that. So those are, you know, that's a hard offseason for a team that's close. And by close, I mean to a Super Bowl. It's an even harder offseason for a team that there's a serious question on whether this is, you know, the last year of the Keim and Cliff regime.
Coming next on the Rise Up Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. We're going to change gears and we're going to talk about the Super Bowl coming up. There's some Cardinals connections there. Who should Cardinals fans be rooting for? Who's Cliff Kingsbury going to root for? That's coming up next on Rise Up Sea Red. We're back on the Rise of Sea Red podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Got the Super Bowl is set. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers with Tom Brady at the helm. It's Bruce Arians, a whole bunch of coaches that coached for the Cardinals back when Bruce Arians was head coach for Arizona, takes on the Kansas City Chiefs, the defending champions who wore down the Buffalo Bills. Patrick Mahomes back again, Andy Reid back again, the Honey Badger, Alex Okafor, and Ricky Seals-Jones. There's a number of former Cardinals players that are going to be in this game. Now, let's talk about where Cardinals fans should be. Well, obviously it doesn't matter, but where do we think that Cardinals fans will be rooting? Because there's lots of connections there. Seth, if for you, I'll say mine. It's like, I am a big Tom Brady fan. I used to dislike him as a player. As I've gotten older, I appreciate and love to see great players do great things. So I can see this greatness continue on. And maybe it's because I'm getting old and I'd like to see someone my age, because Tom Brady is just a few months younger than I am. I found out that I'm not older than Tom Brady. He's actually no, I'm older than Tom Brady. I thought he was the only player I'm not older than. I'm actually older than Tom by a few months. But to see him perform at that level and to get another championship, 7th ring, 10th Super Bowl, and to do it with a new team, and not to be like Peyton Manning was at the end of his career where he could barely throw the ball. Tom Brady does not have the skill he once had, but he's still playing at a high level. 40 touchdown passes. That's better. I think that's better than what Carson Palmer did when he had his magical year in 2015. I want to see Tom Brady win it, and I have nothing against. I would love to see Bruce Arians and his coaching staff win it. You take it a little bit different direction, don't you?
Yeah, I'm not. I mean, I'm indifferent on Brady because he's the greatest. So, like, if he wins, it's just another kind of notch on the belt. For me, though, I have no desire to see Bruce Arians win. Um, the whole thing is that Arians, and he's doing the same thing in Tampa. You and I kind of talked about this beforehand. He has basically said in both his stops, "I'm not building anything. I'm I will coach a team that's good, and he's obviously a good coach, and I will coach a good team and with a veteran quarterback and go from there. I won't do this, hey, let's find young guys and load my roster up with young guys that can grow and make a Chiefs like run what we're expecting over the next, I mean, they've gone to the AFC Championship game 3 years in a row. So, over the next 5 or 6 years, he's looking to win at all costs. This is almost similar to what we've seen in basketball with, kind of mercenary, like hirings. And this is, hey, let's just go get one. Like, that's our goal. Let's go get one. And it's similar to it's akin to what the Toronto Raptors did in the NBA a couple of years ago, where they are, they went and got Kawhi Leonard, they went and got Marcus Gasol, they got these veteran guys on 1 year deals and said, hey, let's go try to win a championship. They got obviously great players in Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski and Antonio Brown and Leonard Fournette. And they got them to buy in and let's be honest, they got them to buy in on the cheap to go and try to win Super Bowls. And I mean, that's the thing. If Arians had left the Cardinals with anything in the cupboard, and he's not the sole responsibility, obviously, but that was his vision of like, hey, he tried to do similar with the Cardinals. It didn't work out, obviously, for a number of reasons. 2014, Carson Palmer, 2016, Chandler Catanzaro can't make field goals. That happens. It just, so it never worked out. But I just don't, I mean, as a fan, I guess if you win a Super Bowl, you're super excited. It's fantastic. It's awesome. But if you don't win a Super Bowl, because even if you go to a Super Bowl and you lose, I mean, are you really happy that that's what your team was? That you had a 1 to 2 year window and then after that you had nothing? I mean, I guess in the fact that you're the Cardinals and you've never actually won, so 1 or 2 years is all you could ask for because you've never had it really. But I'd prefer not to have a rerun of Kurt Warner, of Carson Palmer, and what the Bucs look like they're going to do with Tom Brady. Now it's a little different because Tom Brady's a complete anomaly in the history of Earth. Not just sports, so we'll see what happens.
So yours is more football philosophically. Should Cardinals fans resent BA winning a championship with the Bucs when he couldn't do it with the Cardinals?
I don't know if resent is the right word. I think that they should harbor the feeling that, hey, you were all about Bruce Arians and winning, and whether it was health or whatever the reason, I'm sure health had somewhat to do with it, because he looks awful coaching on the side. Like, I feel bad for him standing out there because he doesn't look healthy, but you literally left this team in ruins and basically this franchise in ruins after selling the false hope of building something in Arizona. Um, and so that's my thing is like, and you quit because you knew how hard and how far down the talent was. And I mean, you've basically showed that you don't have any desire to coach a young team and like I said, build a young roster like what Andy Reid did in Kansas City, um, and so that's where I think Cardinals fans should be like, hey, like that's you bailed on the Cardinals to go do the same thing in Tampa, um, but you were the reason that the Cardinals went that direction and built in that philosophy.
And I think the other way. So I don't believe. I think health was a major reason. Arians was not well. He knew Carson was retiring, and they didn't have a quarterback on the roster. They missed out on Deshaun Watson and Patrick Mahomes the year before because, and honestly, he said it before. They totally thought they were getting one of them. They were sitting at number 13. They're like, hey, there's two quarterbacks on the board. We're good. We're going to get one of them. Had they landed one of those players, I think Arians would have maybe have stayed on another year. But with Carson being out, just the mediocrity of the team and adding to his health and how far away he was from their retirement home just made it really hard. So I don't feel any conspiracy. So I can root for him because, well, it's not just for BA. It's also for the other players who played for the Cardinals. The Deion Buchanan, the Kevin Minters of that team. Kevin Minter, who has, while he was supposed to be an impact linebacker, has turned into a solid player, an impact special teams player. He's a special teams captain on that team. Jason Light, Todd Bowles, Byron Leftwich. There's a lot of players or a lot of coaches and a lot of connections to be happy about that. There wasn't any reason to dislike them. Well, on the Chiefs, you got Alex Okafor left in free agency, Tyrann Mathieu, who was a fan favorite. Obviously, there's mixed feelings about him now, and so there's guys to like on both sides of the ball. And so this is a perfect Super Bowl because I love Patrick Mahomes and what he's doing, and I love the potential, of that model because the Cardinals are trying to do that sort of the same way, and you've got a lot of Cardinals connections on the other side. So honestly, I don't think it's a bad way to go. It's kind of a no lose situation. I do want to talk about this. If you're Cliff Kingsbury, though, where does your heart lie? Because Tom Brady's his homeboy. It's his boy. He's the guy that goes. They've been friends. They go hang out at the Kentucky Derby together, if you remember that. And then you've got the Chiefs with his quarterback. He is the biggest Patrick Mahomes fan in the world. It is Mahomes and Murray. Those are the two guys that he loves most in the league. Which team do you think he's rooting for?
I think he's rooting for Mahomes. And it's not that he's rooting against Brady. I think he just, we're on the precipice of seeing maybe the greatest quarterback ever begin his ascent. And I know people say, well, he began his ascent, his first year playing when he threw over 50 touchdowns. But it's like, he had the magical statistical year, and then last year he was banged up a little, but they got right and won their first Super Bowl. There's a very, very small number of players in NFL history that quarterbacked back-to-back Super Bowl winning teams, Tom Brady being one of them. If Mahomes does that, and he's not even 26 years old, there's a chance that obviously as long as he stays healthy, we could see him hunt down or begin to chase Tom Brady's records.
That's crazy.
If Brady wins, 6 is basically implausible to just understand. If Brady wins, 7 seems virtually, I mean, it starts to feel like that Cy Young type
Right.
of out of reach, because the reality of a guy, and we're not talking winning 7 Super Bowls and you're the long snapper on 4 different teams.
No, starting quarterback.
Yeah.
The most difficult position to play, the one that has all the pressure, and is even the greatest of all times. You have to be the greatest and have the greatest teams, because it's so hard to maintain that sort of success with a quarterback making the money they do.
Well, and just look at the luck part of it. I mean, look at San Francisco this year. I mean, they thought, okay, we're going to go DeForest, or we're going to go Eric Armstead over DeForest Buckner. And Armstead was fine. Buckner was a game changer in Indianapolis. Then Nick Bosa blows his ACL out in game 2. George Kittle is on the IR for 9 weeks of the season. I mean, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, these guys, Richard Sherman, these guys couldn't get on the field. And so it's just, again, it seems like what Brady has done is already impossible to top. But because he will only be 25, Patrick Mahomes having 2 Super Bowls, back to back.
That's 2 Super Bowl. That'd be 2 Super Bowl wins. That's more than Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees. I mean, the greatest.
And that was one of the funniest lines I heard coming out of this weekend is, Tom Brady was upset, and so he went over to the NFC and tied Aaron Rodgers and Drew Brees in NFC championships. And so, I mean, we laugh. It's funny, but it's true. It's crazy to think about that. Tom Brady's been in the NFC 1 year, and he has as many as Aaron Rodgers and Drew Brees. And so that's the thing is everything's Tom's done. This is just like, it's almost like when
this
you
is
make
the in your face, guys. This is the in your face. See, you guys all thought it was Belichick. See, I can do it too.
And it's just almost like it seriously is almost like when you're creating your own, hot fudge sundae or something at home, and you're like, you know what, I'll put some whipped cream on. You know what, I'm going to put sprinkles on. I want 2 kinds of sprinkles. You know what, I want chocolate syrup. Like, you just keep going and going, and that's what Brady's doing now. Like, he's just stacking unattainable records. And so I think that's why I'm rooting for Mahomes, because here's the best thing about sports in general, and I think that's why Cliff would root for Mahomes, is that the best thing about sports is chasing down records. And so Brady's set the bar, and so now to see Patrick have a chance, and like I said, 2 is a lot, a long way off from 6, but 2 in 4 seasons, and it just feels like he's just scratching the surface of his powers is crazy to think about. And then you think, this guy could literally win 3 to 4 more in the next 10 years.
That's crazy. Coming up next on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk about a couple of quarterbacks that aren't on the Cardinals or in the Super Bowl. That's coming up next on Rise of C-Red. We're back on the Rise of C-Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. We talked a little bit about Deshaun Watson, the idea of trading for him. Just throwing that out there. But Deshaun Watson and Matthew Stafford appear to be on the move. Matthew Stafford and the Detroit Lions have agreed that he will move somewhere this offseason. And Deshaun Watson, it's a big question mark of what's going to happen with him. Although, no matter what they do at head coach, the report is that doesn't matter. Watson is done. Now, we'll see how that goes moving forward. But Matthew Stafford is such an interesting situation because I probably said it on this show. I had wished that 3 years ago, that the Lions and Stafford could have cut ties because I felt that Stafford was exactly like Carson Palmer. Stafford's career and Carson Palmer's career are so very similar without the falling out with the franchise. Now, Palmer started his career in Cincinnati, one of the worst run franchises in history. Stafford for the Lions, also one of the worst run franchises in NFL history. And they are in former number one picks, big talent, and they haven't had the playoff success. And then Palmer comes to the Cardinals, and suddenly this team is good. I believe Stafford, wherever he goes, as long as it's not like one of those awful situations, like anywhere he goes, if you look at some of the teams around the league, San Francisco, Washington, and teams that were bad teams this last year, or you take a team like Miami, or Indy, or even Houston, and Houston had to be another good example he could take a team like that and turn it around. Even though Houston would be the one difference is that they had a great quarterback there already, but you take Stafford and put him on these other teams, and I think you see those teams have a Cardinals type success for 3-4 season because what is he, 32 years old? He's got one of the best arms in football. He really is underrated as a quality quarterback. So I don't want to see him in San Francisco, but I want to see Stafford go somewhere and find success because, like Carson Palmer, he hasn't had the career he could have in terms of success.
Yeah, and he's a guy that he went to a historically awful franchise, like you said, a la Palmer. He made it work. They made the playoffs 3 times, two or 3 times, with him as the quarterback. They won a playoff game, right? I thought they won 1, but I could be wrong about that. But and so you just look at what he did, and like you said, it's eerily similar to Palmer. He's a couple of years younger than Palmer was when he got traded to Arizona. It also sounds like
he's 0-3 in the playoffs.
Okay, so he didn't win 1. I thought they beat Dallas for some reason. And the thing is that he's not coming off. I mean, he didn't play poorly when he was on the field, but he's had a lot of injuries. That's why it's interesting to me that the people I've spoken to on the Stafford subject all feel like a 1 is what it's going to take to get him. Isn't that?
It's interesting, though. He did have a good, Cardinals got Carson for a bag of chips. and it's the same type of situation. Because Carson had thrown for over 4,000 yards on a 5-win team, and that's exactly what Stafford did this last year. Honestly, Stafford has had fewer injury concerns than Palmer. Palmer had the ACL, he had a shoulder thing. Stafford had the back thing in 2019, but dating back to since 2010, those are the only games he missed. And when he was on the field, so in 8 games, he had 19 touchdowns and 2,500 yards. He was playing at a super high level. So I don't know. I mean, at his age, I think he's going to cost more than Palmer, obviously, because I don't know what the Raiders were doing with him. But also, Palmer had a bad reputation for whatever reason.
What did Cincy get?
They got a first.
Yeah, so I guess that's accurate because I just went and looked. So Stafford and Palmer are going to be the same age when you basically do the Palmer to the Raiders deal. So I guess that makes sense then. I mean, I don't know. It's baffling to me to think that that you're going to get a first for Matt Stafford, but you look at it and I guess you'll take a first and if you're a team like San Francisco, which from people I trust there say he's their plan B.
It was a first and a second. It was
I don't know if you'll get that much, but I think you'll get a first and cap relief. And so, that's what'll be interesting because I think the teams that make sense are teams like the 49ers, and I know they've already made overtures to figure out what the price was going to be. I don't know if they've necessarily made an offer, but I know that they've called the check in on the price. You know, does a team like Houston look? I mean, they don't have any first round picks, but would they be willing to? Would they be willing to bring in a guy like Stafford? What about the Patriots?
Oh, geez, that would
Is
be
that
that
is that
seriously would be the most Patriots thing to do. And another team interesting would be the Jets, even though they got Sam Darnold, but you brought in a rookie head coach. Stafford would be a great fit for them. Although that would honestly that would totally be like Carson going from Cincinnati to Oakland. Would be
yeah,
the Stafford going to the Jets.
and so that's why it'll be interesting. The other and so when I say that Stafford is plan B for the 49ers, just based on what I've heard. So this isn't like hard and fast fact or breaking news or anything like that. Just based on what I've heard, their plan B is to go after Stafford because their plan A is to go get Deshaun Watson. Now, there's a couple complications with Watson. One being, he's owed a boatload of new money. I mean, just a boatload. Two, San Francisco doesn't the cost of the picks is not concerning of San Francisco, allegedly. Allegedly, it's that they would like to not have to include a guy like Nick Bosa in the trade. Which, I mean, let's be honest, that makes sense. You don't want to give up. If you're going to give up multiple first-round picks for a guy and not really have a chance to – and then handcuff yourself in terms of salary cap, you probably don't want to give away a 13 to 15 sack a year guy on a rookie contract, right? The third issue, and again, this is just what I've heard, is that the Texans have their eye on one quarterback to replace Watson. And interestingly enough, his last name starts with the same letter, and he's from a school that a lot of your kids go to, BYU.
Zach Wilson.
So I don't know if that must be a Caserio thing, their new GM, Nick Caserio.
Wilson is fun. Oh my gosh, he's fun.
And so that's why the conversation of the Jets and the Dolphins is so heavy, is because those teams have the most likelihood to allow the Texans, if they're going to trade a top 5 quarterback in the NFL, to get their guy that, or get Caserio's guy. And so that's what's going to be interesting, because you and I talked about this when I got the text. I mean, it was like 10:30 at night, and I text you and I said, oh, this would be the worst thing possible because if the 49ers got Deshaun Watson, I mean, barring that they're not giving up Nick Bosa and like Fred Warner in the deal, they're the favorites in the NFC, right? Like right out of the gate. I mean, that offense with Watson and then getting,
Well,
these guys.
just the combination of the fact it doesn't matter who Kyle Shanahan puts at running back.
Right. And so, I mean, and it's not that you're afraid to compete or anything like that, but it's just you don't want to see a 25-year-old quarterback in that's already one of the five best quarterbacks in the NFL in your division. I mean, we talked about this. If the 49ers get Stafford, he's very good. Don't get me wrong, but I would say Kyler Murray's still the second best quarterback in the division, and growing towards Wilson. Now maybe Stafford gets in with Shanahan, gets a fresh start, and he becomes kind of that near Pro Bowl level of quarterback, or not Pro Bowl, but near All Pro level of quarterback, like we saw with Arians and Palmer. But it would scare me a lot less than Deshaun Watson coming here and being the best quarterback in the division and maybe the second best player behind only Aaron Donald in the NFC West.
That would be
And,
tragic.
and,
It would be such a Cardinals thing to happen.
right, just the luck of this franchise to
Oh, jeez.
finally have what looks like a really good quarterback, and then your division rival goes, "Hey, we're just going to get one that's better."
We're gonna get the one that's already where you think your guy's gonna get to be.
Right, exactly.
But yeah, so that's all sorts of fun in this offseason. Coming next on Rise of C Red Podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. Let's talk a little bit about the cap situation for other teams, because a ton of teams are over the cap, which means the Cardinals might be able to snag some quality players at positions of need from these teams that are going to have to cut some team players. That's coming next on Rise of C Red. We're back on the Rise of C Red Podcast, the best of Cardinals talk on the web. And we talked about the fact that there are, 15 teams over the cap, ranging from, now, you look at the top, so the Jaguars, Colts, and Jets, and Patriots all have at least $57 million in cap space. Insane. Then you go to the bottom half. The Saints are $112 million over the cap. 112. The Eagles are $53 million. The Falcons are $42 million. The Steelers are $34 million. Rams are $30. Packers $32. Raiders $23. Even the Chiefs are $26 million under the cap. Over the cap. That means there's going to be cap moves made, and that means some quality players are going to hit the market. The one thing, I guess the one thing you kind of look at all this is you kind of point out some specific positions. If there's a position that could slightly flood the market, it would be at pricey cornerbacks, would it not?
Yeah, and you look at it, Breland out of Kansas City.
He's a straight free agent, so he's not even going to be a cut. He's set
right,
to become
but
a free agent.
I just mean they're not going to be able to bring him
Correct.
back, you assume. But we've talked about, the salary cap is pretty fake a lot of the times. but you probably don't bring him back. You've got Marshawn Lattimore, obviously, in New Orleans. So you've got some interesting quality. Lattimore's a cornerback one. There's no question. Breeland's playing as the number one corner for Kansas City. I don't know if that's who he is as a player, but he's definitely playing well.
Well, he's one of those borderline. Like he's been a number one guy, but he hasn't always been great. So he's Patrick Peterson-esque, I guess, is kind of what you get from him. as you get a low end Patrick Peterson on his good, and you get kind of like what Pat Peterson's on his struggle days. You get that.
Yeah, and so, that's where the questions will come in is like what what are you looking for in terms of talent? Like where are you looking to invest in, and who, kind of where do you want to invest in this roster? Obviously, corner is going to be one of the big ones, like you said, and there's going to be, a shot for these guys. I don't want to say past their prime, but you're going to have Marshawn Lattimore. He's going to have a big market. I mean, he's a quality
Well,
NFL
and
corner.
he's going to be a guy that they'll trade.
Yes, they have to trade him. I mean, I guess we shouldn't say have to, but
He's
they would likely trade him for a first round pick in order to draft another corner
right.
because they're painted into a corner. No pun intended there, actually. Um, and they've put themselves in a position where they really just have to invest. And so, I think I think that's one of the key players. And the question becomes, would you be willing to give up the 16th pick for him?
And
I go back. I go back
that's
and
a
forth.
really close probably. It means you're giving up the cost certainty of a first round pick, but you get a guy who you've seen perform at a top level, and you're going to have to pay him in 2022. That's the thing, because he's in the last year of his deal. But it's the Chandler Jones trade. They don't regret the Chandler Jones trade at all. You wouldn't regret a Marshawn Lattimore trade.
No, you wouldn't. And let's be honest, it would give them immediately a top corner, which is something they desperately need. And so, even if you and I mean, it's going to cost you a one, but it may not cost you, more than that. And so, if you get a one, you're still able, or you trade a one, and now you just have second round picks. You're still able to address a number of positions in a highly efficient way. I mean, it's not just going to be like throwing stuff at the wall. And so that's the thing is, I get when people are going to say, well, we just got DeAndre Hopkins for a two and David Johnson. It's like, well, yeah, but you're not dealing with Bill O'Brien anymore. So that's not going to happen. Let's be honest. The Saints are a very well run organization for a reason. They're not just going to give away a great young player. And somebody in the market's going to make a play for him. So that's the question you have to ask is, if it comes to, hey, we can get I don't even know who picks 13th, but we can get the 13th pick. Are you willing to up the ante? That's where the question comes in. Is like, okay, like, can we afford to give a one and a four to this team? Because as Jess and I just broke down, they don't have a ton of picks, one, and two, they don't have a ton of players on the roster, so you can't be giving away, I don't want to say free labor, but pretty cheap labor on your roster.
Interesting. Like if I'm looking on some of the players, you look at the Saints. A couple of names that even if it's not Marshawn Lattimore, he would have to be a trade. You could go with Janoris Jenkins. He's gonna cost them $14.2 million against the cap this year. They'll save half of that. They'll save $7 million if they cut him. And he's 32 years old. He's still a pretty good player, and that's the type of play. If he gets cut, that would be kind of like a Robert Alford signing. If you looked at it, he'd be kind of like a Robert Alford signing. Another guy that would be interesting would be Emmanuel Sanders, who, he's going to be a $10 million cap hit. They'll save $4 million by cutting him. He would be a nice match. I thought he would have been a nice match a year ago when the Cardinals were out looking for a receiver. Those are a couple of players that would be really nice ads. They've got like a guy that's probably going to be cut is Quan Alexander, because that's gonna they take no dead money on that because he was acquired from the 49ers, and they'll save more than $13 million. You know, if you're looking for, if he still thinks do you replace Jordan Hicks with Quan Alexander, even though both have a history of injuries? There's a number of players that you could look at on the Saints and go, they might be able to be had, is something like that. Now on the other side, the teams like the Chiefs, you know, like, he wouldn't come back, but Tyrann Mathieu it's going to be tough to keep him around next year with the cap hit, because he's due to be almost $20 million, and you can save 14.8. You've got guys like Anthony Hitchens. You've got guys like, it's going to be rough, but Eric Fisher, who tore his Achilles leading up to the Super Bowl. Not that there's going to be a player that they target, but there's a lot of players that are going to hit the market. It's going to be interesting how they go and in what direction. But yeah, it's going to be a fun offseason, and it's going to be really hard for players, because when you got half the teams over the cap, that means a lot of players are going to hit the market, and there's going to be a lot of players taking pay cuts. And while that is good for the business, it's not good for the business of players.
No, and it's good for the teams like the Cardinals, who are slightly under the cap, because they'll be able to, make plays on players they may not have. However, like you said, I think we're going to see a lot of 1 year, 2 year type deals to kind of get a year in and make sure you get some money, but you don't want to. You want to take a chance on yourself, and be able to go back and get
when the new media contract comes in.
Yeah. So I think that's what we'll see more than anything on this, is that you're going to see a lot of 1 year, 2 year deals that give players the options to opt out and go, find some more money when it's time.
And with that, we will wrap up this edition of the show. We're going to start slowing things down, but with the Senior Bowl happening this week, we can talk Senior Bowl. We can talk a little more Cardinals news to have. So we'll probably have one more show next week before we probably take a few weeks off getting ready for the draft, since there will be no regular combine. So we'll be back next week after that. We're going to hit our off-season break. And with that, thanks for listening. That's Seth Cox, and I'm Jess Root. We'll be back again soon. Thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms, so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise up, Red Sea, be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.
Roll!